Captain's Log, Wednesday, October 15th, 8:32 a.m., Lehi, Utah, United States of America, the planet Earth.
Mike and Kenny in the morning.
Great day to be alive.
It's a great day to be alive.
It is beautiful. Man.
You know what's on my mind this morning, Kenny?
What?
FedRAMP 20X. Yeah.
Funny that.
Weird, right?
It's a big thing.
So we had a client come in who is in a space where most of their competitors, or at least the big competitors, have done FedRAMP. And they're a big player in the space and they haven't done it. Because of kind of the traditional, we didn't have a sponsor, it's super expensive, it takes forever, the board someday will decide to do it. It was kind of like an inevitable thing. And FedRAMP 20X is really cool for companies that find themselves like the FedRAMP curious, that have dipped a toe in it before, or tell themselves like, yeah, we'll go do this someday. FedRAMP 20X is a pretty awesome option.
100%. I mean, the biggest barrier, sponsorship. I mean, we're 20X authorized now, and that took us not very long to do that. And so we are authorized on the FedRAMP marketplace, and we actually can do business with agencies, and we are pending shutdown. It is October 15, 2025. That's going to get figured out. I believe that there will be a U.S. federal government in the future.
Yeah. If I was a betting man, I would bet on it.
I would bet on it. I would count on it. But removing that sponsorship, I mean, that's the direct path to the market. Right.
100%. Yeah, and that was a big hurdle for a lot of people. We'd have leads come in all the time, people that were just saying, can you help me find a sponsor? That was their main thing that they needed. So it's cool that that's gone. Like you mentioned, the FedRAMP 20X stuff didn't take us as long to do. There is still a lot of work to do with 20X. The security standards in it are actually a little bit tougher.
100%. It's way more comprehensive. What happens is, typically in the old way, you just have a bevy of information, right, that's going to show up in that ginormous SSP. I mean, we had clients, I've seen SSPs that are over 4,000 pages long. That's insane.
It's insane.
And so it requires tooling, it requires huge teams to manage it, but ultimately the auditors are incentivized to go like, hey, let's look at what AC1 Part A requires. And that is like that. I'm referring to a policy control, and it's like, how are policies communicated? How are they updated? How do you make sure that the right people have access to them? How do you make sure that people have acknowledged that this policy exists? And that particular control, whether it was Rev 4 or Rev 5, repeats like 18 times, right? It didn't really matter. And so that sucks, right? When we don't really do our access policy any different than our change management policy. But what an auditor would look for is like, hey, does this referencing, access control here in this particular solution implementation? You're just like, no, it's just the policies. And so some people would put a stink about that. And so we put tooling to handle that kind of weird thing. And so there's a lot of inefficiencies that get created with the legacy approach. Yes, it's comprehensive, but the problem is it's so hard to actually implement because you're just inundated with all of these different requirements, and you spend time optimizing for the deliverables instead of actually doing security, which is what 20X is trying to flip that on its head.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, yeah, and I think that's a good point. Like one of our clients pointed out to us the first time around, like, when you look at things like, are your S3 buckets encrypted? In a Rev 5 audit, you were taking a sampling and then kind of, accepting risk from there. In FedRAMP 20X, it's literally checking every single one. So it does get stricter. So there are parts of 20X that get a little bit tighter, but ours didn't take us very long. Moderate is obviously going to be a little bit more involved than low was, but
it's the same approach that we've always taken, because it is always about what data comes into your environment, people, process, and technology, building out the stacks. And there's incredible innovations we have now in that space with intake on platform. All of that's brand new. With it's managing your risk profiles. it's just really exciting. We've always done it the same, where we get really clear about shifting the security requirements to the left so that we can actually do this, right? So when you look at the requirements, what's actually required in the RMF, it's really hard. And you have to understand that. And when you understand it, it's really hard. You have to shift a lot of the security architecture away to the left. And when we say shift to the left, it just means that you're implementing. I'll give you an example. We talk about these controls a lot with clients, where we talk about Terraform, we talk about Helm for deploying applications, where you really have how to implement your entire security environment. It's always in code. So Terraform implements these new components within AWS, and it implements even the security settings on those components. And then you use something like Helm, which is going to implement the applications that you're using within that environment and enforcing all of those security standards. And so at the very beginning, we made sure to use code to implement your entire program, and you got a chance at that point. Because then when you go to for something like your containers, right, you can actually, we live in a day where you can produce vulnerability-free containers, which is crazy. With an awesome company like ChainGuard, right? They produce these vulnerability-free images, which is insane. Like, so you run a scan against it and it's like totally clean, which never happened in the past, but that does happen today. And so you leverage a tool like that to implement a vulnerability-free image, and then you put immutable code into your environment that can't change. And so a lot of these controls become, like, I don't need to do that. I don't need to go auto remediate code in my production environment. That's not a great practice, but there were some security things that said, hey, automatically remediate that. You just need to move that to the left. And so all this is to say, security is freaking hard to do, like if you want to do it the right way, but it is possible today. And so when you have that and everything's in code, then it's a matter of like, okay, give me the results of this configuration. Like I'm gonna scan this configuration file, and I'm gonna summarize what is in that configuration code with some sort of fetcher. We call them fetchers. Right.
Makes Kenny sound angry. Let's talk about that fetcher.
Yeah. Yeah, everybody's like, what's Kenny so angry about? No, yes, I am angry a lot, but but we do have that fetcher that gives us repeatable evidence on an ongoing basis that's coming into, Paramify. We're not exfiltrating the whole entire configuration file into Paramify, but we have that evidence. And then you can consistently validate that however often that thing comes into the environment. It's just going to validate, which is so cool. We've always had this as like the model. The documentation was just taken care of. So there was this big stupid document. We were like, okay, it's fine. I mean, this is how we do it. And I'm just going to say these policy solution capabilities, I'm going to say those 18 times. Yeah, we just do that for the full stack of controls.
Well, that's a good distinction to make, because there's still work to be done in FedRAMP 20X, but it feels like it's a little more of the actual security work, and the manual side of like manually collecting evidence, attaching it everywhere it needs to belong, writing implementation statements, all that is now automated. That's all.
You have to automate over 70% of that.
Yeah. So for companies who have looked into it before, it is going to move quicker. Timelines even at the PMO are quicker. When I was first learning about FedRAMP, the timeline that was being put out by people was 13 months from the time you submitted to even like starting your review.
Oh, easily, and longer.
Yeah.
Right.
And so that's been cut down. So now you've got no sponsor needed. You've got a much quicker timeline to get into it, and it's gonna be a lot cheaper. Audit costs are less expensive. Platform costs are less expensive, consultant advisory costs are less expensive. And so it is actually a very approachable way for any tech company who has a product they want to sell into government it's a very approachable way for them to be able to sell to agencies.
100%. And you mentioned the audit costs, right, for the 3POs. And the 3POs, they just simply were given, like, this is what I have to audit against. And so they have to charge to do what they were doing. So it's not like they made it up, right?
No.
They had to do it.
Well, we've seen it in other frameworks. If you force that cost down, what sacrifices is quality, which in FedRAMP you can't sacrifice.
100%. And a lot of them are pretty good at security, and they know how to implement things, so they can actually, it's a great advantage to them because they can assess what really matters versus like, hey, you didn't you said change management policy in your access control policy. Why did you say that, right? They don't have to worry about that crap, right? That changes, right? But not only on the audit side, but it's also the agencies. So agencies, when we talked to Pete back in March in our podcast, it was very clear that the agencies had an upfront cost to pay to sponsor it, hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? That they had to admit. So their number was, agency was something around 300K, right? That the agency had to pay. And so they're like, what's that budget going to come out of? And then ultimately, the agencies still need to make their risk-based decision after, FedRAMP, was implemented, right? So that is just really expensive. And so 20X is trying to make everything transparent. So the name of the game is transparency wins. You cannot look at how a control is implemented and say, oh, this integration does it. It's not going to work, right? There's more to it. So in order for that to happen, if it's a black box integration, the auditor has to get very comfortable with that particular integration and also with the implementation of that integration in that environment. So the auditor needs to, if they're a good auditor, they need to understand, hey, is this getting the complete population of this? And it'll be like, I'm comfortable with this, but it doesn't solve for the flexibility that's needed in an actual enterprise. For example, if I check that MFA is enabled on all of my AWS accounts, that's a CLI command that I can do, and that's really good. However, there are in many enterprises legacy applications that need to use some sort of API. They need to use a token or a key, a secret, to get into an environment. And so you need to enumerate those things that bypass that particular MFA, because not everything does that. And so there's different controls around secrets management. And so if you look at a particular check the box compliance thing, you check to see, hey, does this work? But you also have to understand the security architecture. How are you handling the secrets that can bypass that MFA? That's another thing that's it just needs to be transparent. And that's why I think we've had so much success like early on with this 20X approach, because our approach has always been say what you do what you say, and transparently validate that. So we're not going to put the queries on how we get that information. That needs to be basically open source, which it is. Like all of our fetchers are open source. All of our validators are open source. There's nothing to hide. We said why we feel good about this, make that really, really good.
Yeah, it needs to be super transparent.
Yeah. So we talked about it's a high security bar where it matters. And so that's where the work needs to happen anyway. The other thing that's different, Pete talked about this at the Coalfire event at RamCon. He talked about this for a while, and I don't think many people are talking about this. When we talk about security responsibility, there's typically, within an enterprise, there's 3 layers. You usually have your solution providers, something like a solution like Okta, and then you have an implementation team, legacy IT, new IT, security. The security org has all of these protection services that they set up. So they're responsible for implementing Okta, and they need to implement this solution so that the hundreds of service teams, literally hundreds of service teams, can adopt that particular solution. What happens is, something doesn't get configured correctly by the IT team, or actually at the end user level. So sometimes when we hear about breaches, it's usually an end user configuration. And it's really hard to blame an end user if they don't configure something correct when the mechanism by which they're supposed to configure it is in some sort of spreadsheet that says, hey, you need to do this. That is tough. And there haven't been, except for, Paramify, like how we were built from the very beginning, there haven't been really any tools that help make that process really easy to set up from the get-go. Here's the component, here's who implements it, here's the end user responsibility, tied to the various capabilities that it has.
That's right. Which to Pete's point at the event, that's where most breaches actually happen. It's usually not a technological breach, it's a process problem.
Yeah, this vulnerability exists on some server and it could get popped. That does happen. So there are usually a lot of those things that get popped, those like really embarrassing ones that you read about in the Wall Street Journal or New York Times, whatever it is. You hear about these breaches that are, oh my gosh, so, billions of, whatever. Billions of people have been affected by this particular breach. Those are usually wholesale failures from the, not just one control that breaks, but usually there's assets that are completely unmanaged. You don't know what your asset inventory is. You don't know who owns that. And so you have unmanaged assets, and then that starts collecting data, and it's important data, and it actually is an important part of the app. And then some bad configuration, that S3 bucket is open, and breach. And so you have, when you're dealing with the federal government, that's what the RMF is supposed to do. It's supposed to kind of build out layers of security, because all security can be broken, all controls can be broken. What we want to do is make it complex.
That's right.
It's the analogy of how do you outrun a bear? Just run faster than your buddy. And because nation states have the resources that they need to be able to breach what they want with enough time. And so you just got to make it really annoying. And so if your focus is all on building this stupid document that actually isn't true, like the only thing that's true on that SSP is the date that it was submitted, maybe a few other things, but you're describing a world that doesn't exist. And so that gets flipped on its head. And the great thing about Paramify, like why we were so fast, we had an intern and a part-time VCSO, working on our package. They managed everything within Paramify. The reason is because our approach has always been what we just described. There's nothing to hide. It's totally open. Right?
Yep. So I think the call out here is for companies that have thought about FedRAMP or toyed around with the idea or decided against it in the past, now is a great time to revisit.
100%.
Never been a better time to do FedRAMP.
Never better. Right, so we can talk about the phases, right? So so phase one is done. Talked about that a lot. We're kind of, phase two is kicked off, but we can't submit yet. And we'll keep you guys up to date on that, right? Whenever we hear something, just watch our LinkedIn, watch our skits. Yes! Yes, guys, we did it! You did it! You did this! I was a little out of line last week.